Hello everybody and welcome. Today we're going to go through data protection, the basics. The course will last about 30 minutes, might last slightly longer, but we're aiming for 30 minutes. Before we start, there's a kitchen just out of the door to the right and then on your left. There's no fire drills planned, so if you do hear the fire alarm, please make your way to the exit. You can go through main reception or there's a fire exit just as you are on the left. And I think that's it. Did anybody have any questions before we start?
No, thank you.
Okay. So, we're just going to go through a really brief kind of cover of what personal data is. So, personal data can be defined as any information which would make a person identifiable. So, if somebody could determine who you were from a piece of information that they found, that would be considered personal data. Consent must be sought to hold personal data, and the reasons for holding the data should be clear to the person that you will be holding those records on. Personal data is protected by the Data Protection Act 1998. There are a couple of exemptions to the Data Protection Act, and that is if it's a matter of national security, you don't need to follow the data protection kind of rules. If it's to do with crime and taxation, you can provide personal data without having permission beforehand. And also if it's for domestic purposes. So, does anybody have any examples of personal data that they could give to me?
Home address.
Home address?
National insurance number.
Yeah.
Sexual orientation.
I don't know whether that would be personal data on its own, because you wouldn't be able to identify a person just from that information alone, but with other information it would be. So I've got name, address, telephone number, bank account details, but again some of them, like the address and the telephone number, you wouldn't know who the exact person is, but you would know where somebody lived from that information. So, now what we're going to do, we're going to have a little look at the Data Protection Act overview and also the ICO and where that kind of comes within the data protection. And then we're going to do a little exercise. So the Data Protection Act is an Act of Parliament that's enforced in the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which defines UK law on the processing of data. And that's for identifiable living people. And it is the main piece of legislation that governs the protection of personal data in the UK. And the ICO kind of runs alongside it, and it's the Information Commissioner's Office. So if there was a breach of data protection, if there was a breach in data protection, they're the office that regulate data, so you could report it to them and they would have a look into it for you. So, after looking at that, I've got a couple of true or false statements. Don't know if you want to go into two groups. And there's just 3 statements each. If you want to have a look at them and decide whether you think they are true or whether you think they are false.
My address, but still data protection.
Yeah, it's not individual. Yeah, so I'm saying
Put the name and address if you're putting in. It depends what kind of comment. Like she's got brown hair and green eyes. It's not. So that's a little bit grey, but we need to put it in true and false.
True.
That's true. Is it? Only if it fits in with her.
If they're asking about crime, but please still look at crime, so yeah. is true.
So those are true, and that's
Not sure.
You all ready?
Yes, I'm.
Okay, so let's get back to that. So the first statement was Data Protection Act only applies to data held on paper. Do you think that's true or false?
False.
False. And it is false. Data protection can apply to images, videos, and electronic data too. Anything that somebody can be identified by. And then comments about an individual in an email is considered as personal data.
We're not quite sure on this one.
Yeah.
Depends what
what kind of
information
comments.
goes into that email.
Okay, so do you two know what you think?
I think false,
Yeah, I think
because
false as well.
comments could be, I don't like her skirt.
Yeah,
So it
Yeah.
could be,
Yeah.
brown.
I'm not
hair-
sure.
Brown hair and green eyes.
Yeah.
Jane blogs and business.
She's moving,
saying it's doing this.
yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, so it's true. This is personal data as the expressions or opinions could make the individual identifiable.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Brown hair, green eyes.
Who's wearing a skirt today? Oh, it's me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one shocked me as well because I wasn't sure about that when I was
Yeah,
reading
that's
it.
not true side.
Oh, well done.
And then personal data is any information regarding an individual which they would like to remain private. Is that true or false?
I said false because I might say, no, Lynn, you can know my address, but it's still held under data protection.
Okay. So yeah, it's false. Personal information is anything that makes you identifiable, and this may not be something that an individual considers private. That's true. And the next one is if data is no longer required for the initial reason for obtaining it, then it must be destroyed. Is that true or false? Yeah, and that's true. However, data can be kept indefinitely for research purposes, for example, preservation of historical archives, which I also didn't know, which was quite interesting.
Historical archives in another 50 years.
And then, so if police ask for personal information, we are legally required to provide it to them. True or false?
We should go be true on this one.
I looked at it though, you said,
In the section there.
yeah, in the section it says crime, and police will deal with crime, therefore it would be true.
Yeah, so it's false because I was surprised at this one. It says data does not have to be supplied if the investigation is not believed to be legitimate, or if failure to supply the information would prejudice the investigation. But usually data would be supplied for investigation purposes, but a section 29 request explaining why the data is required would be made by the police first.
Right,
But so you don't actually legally have to if you think it's not legitimate, which is quite interesting.
Well, I suppose if someone just like jumped over someone's fence, that's like kind of a crime, but you don't need to know all of.
That's not a crime, is it?
Yeah, but I'm just using like,
trespassing in it.
yeah, it's like
Well,
really
the
minor.
policeman that stopped you the other day, whether he could come and ask for your address information. That's not, so you wouldn't be required to give him your details
So, yeah,
because he hasn't got a legal requirement to do it.
Yeah. So yeah, I just assumed that you would have to give it to the police, but you don't actually have to.
Was that with CSA? You have to, don't you? Child Support Agency, it's just.
Oh, you absolutely have to.
Yeah. Well, we do.
Yeah. And then the final one, the Information Commissioner will issue compensation if data protection has been breached. I know you might not know, but I just put them in there because it's information as well,
Yeah.
because I didn't know the answer to this either.
We said false, because, yeah, they do compensate people, but if it's, a breach has been made to them, the amount of breaches that get made to them, the amount of compensation they're going to have to
Yeah. Could be something minor, like, it might just be a one-off, it might not be like a whole company.
Yeah, as big a thing.
Yeah.
So it is false. The Information Commissioner cannot award compensation. They can issue an enforcement order to rectify the breach, but the individual can serve domestic legal action if they feel they've been caused damage or stress as a result of the breach. Which I suppose makes sense because it wasn't actually the ICO's kind of
Yeah.
problem in the first place. They're just having it reported to them, aren't they?
Yeah.
So Yeah, so I learned quite a lot by just doing the true or false things actually. Right, so now I was going to just go through on how to protect against a data protection breach. And for this one, I'm hoping it'll play. I've got about a 3-minute video that we can watch. Click on it. See, it worked on my home computer. But the work one's different, isn't it? I have to turn the sound on, don't I? You can blast your ears out. I'm doing it like that. Sorry everybody, oh it keeps doing that. Oh, come on.
First thing, please policies for your own. They have to be clear, they have to be accessible, they have to be.
You can't really hear it, can you? It's very quiet. I might leave the video then, because if you can't hear it properly, can you hear it?
Just about.
First.
Yeah. Okay, I'll start it from the start then, and I'll be really quiet.
Nobody moved.
Probably three things that you need to do. The first thing is probably clear policies for your own. They have to be clear, they have to be accessible, they have to be engaging. Gone are the days when you can have a 20-page policy sitting in the corporate manual and expect people to read it. It has to be to the point, it has to be in the language that they expect to read and learn it. So that's the foundation, if you like, for this. The second thing I think is going to be a mixture of technology to help, but also to report when there is an incident. So that technology is going to protect data when it's in transit and when it's at rest, and it's going to also give you metrics to tell you that there's been a breach, or if an employee tells you that they have a breach, like a laptop's been stolen or something like compromised, it will enable you to do something about it. Then the third element is training, telling employees what's expected of them. Obviously, there's a close link there with the policy as well. But training is very important. It has to be engaging. It has to be, again, something that's in a language that people understand and something that they want to come back to as well. For most organisations, that's going to have to be a mix, particularly for high-risk employees, of face-to-face training, of the policies being refreshed, and of videos a little bit like this that people can pick up and put down and refresh themselves with content. And for most organisations, unfortunately, the situation is now we're talking about when there's a breach not in. If you're a moderate to large organisation, you are going to suffer 2 or 3 breaches a year, no matter how good you are. Getting these 3 things in place and working together will help you prevent breaches. It will also help you remedy them when they do happen. But you need to rehearse as well, and you need to make sure that everything's in sync and important to remember that your employees have to know when they're done as well.
And that was it. Sorry, that one was a bit quiet. I didn't think of that. I should have bought a speaker subwoofer or something. Right, so yeah, he kind of covered clear policies for employees to the point and in an understandable language. So you're not going to really pay much attention to it if you don't understand it. Record and protect data, including recording breaches. Data protection training, engaging and understandable. Regular data protection refresher training. So in summary, learn that any information which is data that makes an individual identifiable is protected under the Data Protection Act. The ICO regulates breaches in data protection. You can take legal action if a data protection breach causes damage or stress. Clear policies and regular training can help protect an organisation against security breaches. And there are 3 exemptions that are not protected by data protection: Section 28, Section 29 and Section 36. Any questions?
When it says it's protected by domestic, what does that mean?
Yeah, I had a look into that. I think it's might be like if it's, what's the word? Like, can't think of the word, like safeguarding, I think it might be that kind of thing. Yeah. Because I had to research what it exactly meant. So that's it. But I did forget to do the icebreaker right at the start, so I don't know if you want to do it now. Quickly, just to finish up with it. So I don't know. I haven't actually tried it, so I don't know if it properly works. You will have just a piece of paper. And then what we have to do, apparently, is close our eyes. So we're not going to be drawing, writing or anything like that. So we have to close our eyes and we have to fold it. Then you have to rip a corner and we have to do it 4 times. But I'll tell you what to do if you like. So if you all close your eyes, then fold your piece of paper in half. And then rip the top right hand corner. And then once you've done that, you then fold in half again. And then rip the top left hand corner.
You're making snowflakes.
And then once you've ripped that one, you fold it in half again. And then rip the top right hand corner. And then if you're able to do it, it might be a bit thick now. You do it one more time in half and then rip the top left hand corner.
What did you say? I can.
I did a long one.
And then once you've done that, you can open your eyes and then you have to open them back up. Oh, Lynn's is really pretty.
I just got mad.
So basically, it's supposed to be an exercise to show you that whilst you're all given exactly the same instructions, you all come out with something different.
It's like a cracker.
Yeah. So yeah, which I suppose is like training. Everybody's given the same kind of information, but you all take something different from it. So it's the same as the paper.
Oh, it's actually a cracker.
It's extra happy.
Yeah.
Mine's just Spider-Man. It's just really good.
Well, because there weren't instructions as to which way to fold it, so I folded, saying.
Yeah, no, there was no guideline there with folding it. It's just you fold it. Yeah, I probably should have done a bigger piece of paper, then it wouldn't have got so good. Yeah, that was the kind of best one I could find. I quite liked it actually. Good. So then the very final thing is if you're all happy to complete an evaluation on how you think that my training session went today. Okay. I've written out 10 because I thought I was going to have 10 people.
Anonymously.
I did bring a pen to this one.
You can do it anonymously. I've put a section for a name, but you can leave that blank. Have you got? Oh, sorry. I don't know that.